A Week in the Woods, Chapter 5, Zero Pressure. Wonder what that's going to mean. George Washington and Abraham Lincoln stared at Mark from the calendar that was thumbtacked next to the chalkboard. Mark stared back and forced his mind to work. Friday, February 27th, he thought. It's Friday, February 27th. So that means I've been at this school exactly 10 days. Feels like 10 years. Mark was having trouble staying awake. He propped up his head and chewed on the end of his pencil. Anything to keep his eyes open. The teacher, was it Miss Longhorn or maybe Miss Lego? Whatever her name was, Mark thought she was a lousy math teacher. In fact, the moment Mark had walked in the front door of Hardy Elementary School, he decided that the whole place was lousy. Before Monday, February 16th, Mark had never set foot inside a public school. He had had 3rd grade, 4th grade, and half of 5th grade at Lawton County Day School in Scarsdale. The 2 years before that, he'd been at the American School in Paris. Before Paris, it was kindergarten at the Hames School in New York City. And before that, he'd gone to a Montessori school in Santa Fe. He glanced at the fraction problems on the chalkboard and fought back a yawn. He thought, I learned all that stuff years ago. Mark shifted in his chair and looked out the window. More snow. For the past week, at least 2 inches of snow had fallen every day. And Mark was glad. The snow was like a layer of soundproofing. It made everything quiet. And quiet was something Mark had begun to appreciate. A stretch and a yawn earned Mark a disapproving scowl from the teacher. He straightened up in his chair, but slumped down again as soon as she looked back at the chalkboard. He thought, at least I get to sit in the back of the room at this school, so I guess that's one good thing about the place. Mark also liked that there were so many kids in every class. At Lawton Country Day School, Mark's classes had been small, no more than 12 students, sometimes as few as 5. In classes like that, there was no escape, no chance to slack off. Never. But here, there were 24 other kids. Zero pressure. Scanning the room, Mark looked over his classmates. He stared at the backs of their heads and tried to remember some names. But even a clear look at their faces wouldn't have helped him much. Mark could only recall the names of 2 kids. 2 names in 10 days? That's pathetic. Mark gave a mental shrug. But so what? It's not like it matters. When Mark had arrived for his first day in the middle of February, in the middle of 5th grade, he decided the place didn't need him any more than he needed it. In 4 months, 5th grade would be over, and he'd be gone for good. And these kids? Were any of them looking for a new friend? Why would they be? The way it looked to Mark, most of the kids at his new school had been together since kindergarten. Hardy Elementary School was an old school to them, and they were the old kids. And by the middle of February and the middle of 5th grade, they had themselves pretty well sorted out into pairs and sets and groups of friends. Mark had no place in their universe. So he kept to his own little orbit. By the middle of February, in the middle of 5th grade, the old kids at the old school had gotten themselves sorted out academically and in just about every other way possible. They knew who the best students were and which of their friends were going to be in the accelerated math group or the low English group at the middle school. And they also knew which girls and boys would probably make the basketball teams and the soccer teams, and who was the best artist in 5th grade. They knew these things because most of the old kids had been looking at each other and listening to each other for years. And they had been watching as teachers looked and listened too. Suddenly, all that information felt like it was important. So the old kids were getting things figured out. By the middle of February, in the middle of 5th grade, it was starting to feel like elementary school was ending. The old kids were looking ahead to 6th grade at the middle school. Big brothers and sisters had told them who the nice teachers were and also which ones to watch out for. So the old kids had begun to talk about stuff like that at lunch and recess and when they walked home after school with their friends. But Mark, that kid who moved into that huge house out west of town in the middle of February, Mark didn't know a thing about this school or the kids in it. He didn't even know the name of the middle school. After a week or two, most new kids would have found someone who was halfway friendly, an old kid who didn't mind answering a lot of questions, because most kids would have wanted to figure out what was going on. But Mark Robert Chelmsley hadn't done that. He wasn't like most kids, and especially not like most kids in Whitson, New Hampshire. That's why the other 5th graders left him pretty much to himself, which seemed to suit Mark just fine. Even Jason Frazier left him alone, and Jason rarely missed a chance to bully someone. In this case, Jason had made a good decision. Mark had taken private karate lessons 3 afternoons a week since he was 6. He knew self-defense. Jason would have learned quickly that Mark Robert Chelmsley was not a boy to be bullied. During 4th and 5th grades in Scarsdale, Mark had also had math and English tutors come to his home 2 afternoons a week, and a month before moving to Whitson, he had taken his private school entrance exams. He had done well, and that's why he was already accepted into Runyon Academy. Next year, he'd be going to one of the most exclusive prep schools in America, the kind of school attended by presidents and senators and their children and grandchildren. Nothing but the best for you, Mark. Nothing but the best. That's what his dad had said. A week before the move, his mom had said, "Now, Mark, I want you to make the most of these few months up in Whitson. This school will be a nice little break before you get down to some serious work next year at Runyon." That's what she said. What Mark heard was this: "Mark, all you have to do is have a little fun and try to stay out of trouble until you leave for summer camp. Because what happens at Hardy Elementary School doesn't really count." So Mark didn't care which teachers at the middle school were nice. He didn't care which kids were the smartest or the best soccer players. And if he found himself starting to care, or even starting to wonder about things like that, he told himself, "It's got nothing to do with me." Mark knew that his parents were some of the richest people in this part of New Hampshire, maybe some of the richest people in the whole country. It was something he tried not to think about, but he couldn't really forget it. Not in Whitson. Being rich at Lawton Country Day School hadn't mattered. Mark had fit in perfectly. The other kids there had worn blazers and shirts and ties and shoes just as nice as his. Kids at his old school didn't wear clothes from Walmart. In fact, there wasn't a Walmart within 20 miles of Scarsdale. At Lawton Country Day, the other kids had had plenty of spending money, just like he did. And after school, the cars that came to collect the other children were just as expensive and new and fancy as the ones that came for him. Here in Whitson, all the other kids rode home on the bus or drove home with their moms and dads in minivans or pickups or cars like Jeeps and Toyotas. Mark was the only kid in town who got picked up by a driver in a big Mercedes. And after the way the kids had stared at him on his first afternoon, Mark had told Leon not to get out and hold the door open for him anymore. Being from such a rich family didn't make Mark feel like he was any better than the other kids at Hardy Elementary School. Not better, just different. So he kept his distance. No sense pretending. 3.5 months and he'd be gone. It's not like Whitson's going to turn into my hometown or something, he told himself. Mark knew that from the start. First this crummy little school, then summer camp, then Runyon Academy. Gone. Apart from their new company over in Lebanon and him going to school at Runyon Academy, Mark knew there was another major reason his parents had bought the big old house outside Whitson. It was because his mom liked different places and new projects. At least, she liked them for a while. The 3 years in Scarsdale had been the longest time Mark had ever lived in one home. Since his parents spent most of their time at meetings and conferences or entertaining business associates at the house in Palm Beach, Mark knew what would happen when he started at boarding school. Once he got settled at Runyon, Mark knew that the house and the old barn and the 400 acres in Whitson would stop being home. No one would even call it that. Mom and Dad would start calling it the New Hampshire place. It would become just another place to visit for a while, like their Santa Fe place and their London place and their Palm Beach place, and now their Scarsdale place. As math class ended, the bell rang, and Mark jumped in his seat. The girl next to him giggled, just as she had on Thursday. Mark felt his face start to get hot. 10 days, and that harsh, metallic ringing still startled him. Couldn't get used to it, and he didn't want to get used to it. He didn't want to get used to anything at this school. The math teacher began scribbling Monday's homework assignment onto the chalkboard, and the kids began copying it down. Not Mark. He pushed his chair back, picked up his backpack, and walked out into the noisy hallway. He took a left and headed for Mr. Maxwell's room. One more class, and week number 2 would be over, and then there would only be 14 more. The end of chapter 5.